So we actually, when you read your call packet, if you're called English speaking, you're like, oh, like wow, that's crazy. I'm going foreign, but I'm English speaking. And you get to the mission field, and you realize that they really don't speak in English. And it actually sounds like a foreign language. And as I mentioned previously, it took me probably about, serving in Guyana, it took me about probably 3 weeks to a month to actually start to comprehend a lot of the things that they were saying. So like, I'll just give you a brief, like, if you were to like pass someone on the street, you always say like good morning, but the way they say it is marnin. So it's like, hey marnin boy, how you doing? And so that phrase in itself is like good morning, but boy. Like if you're a boy or a guy, they'll call you bye. If you're a girl, it's gal. And then like how you doing, which is how are you doing, like right now. So the phrase is essentially like, hey bye, like, or hey boy, like how are you doing now, which is like, hey bye, how you doing now. So they condense and they speed up like the language. So another, like, if I were just to throw like a whole bunch of random phrases together and kind of just like translate it back into English, even though it's like essentially English. But one of them that's really funny is like, hey bye, we gone down the road, and we're gonna throw we frame now. So let me go now. And like that means like, hey, we're gonna go down the road, so let's move our bodies, or let's get going. Like we're gonna go somewhere else. And so the way you say that is just like, hey bye, we're gonna go down the road and we're gonna throw we frame. And so like throw your frame, I don't know. So it's like they use all of these like English words, but they use it in different contexts that like you've never even heard it before. Or like if you were just to say hello to someone, it's like wagwan, which is wa, which is what's, gua, which is go, and on, so what's going on, like wagwan. And so they just took 3 words and created 1 word out of it. And so to kind of like pick up, like you're essentially like trying to take your English language and just like condense it. And if you try to understand, if you're trying to understand everything that they're saying, it's going to be really difficult. You have to kind of like just kind of, I don't know, you can't focus on what they're saying like too much. You just kind of have to get the broad like general view, and you're like, okay, yeah, I know what you're talking about. So that was pretty funny to get used to. But let me see if I can pull out some like some other things that they would say. Like they're really funny people, and they're really honest. And so if you do something that's like foolish or dumb, like they'll be like, boy, you shubarawana, which I just said like, are you stupid or what? But they say shubarawa, like you real dotish na boy, like you head bore. And it means like, do you have a hole in your head? Like, so they say a lot of funny stuff like that. Or sometimes if missionaries have acne on their faces, the members of the locals, they think that it's mosquito bites. And so they're like, oh, looks like mosquitoes bite your face bad. And that's one of the things that like those missionaries, they'd get so frustrated with the locals, because they're just like, oh, that's so embarrassing. Now, one of the funniest things about the language, and this is something that I actually still struggle with, is that when they ask questions, they use statements and put a question mark at the end of it. So an example, like here in Utah, we'd be like, hey, could you go get that for me? And then in the Caribbean, they'd be like, hey, you could get that for me? And so I go to drive-thrus all the time now, and I'm like, okay, I could get a burrito and, you know, this other thing. And people don't understand my question because I'm using a statement like, I could get a burrito, but I'm putting a question mark at the end of it. So it's like, I could get a burrito? And that's one of the like the hardest things to get used to when you come home. It's kind of natural. You begin asking questions like that. And so I have to consciously think about like saying like, okay, could you go get that for me, instead of like, you could get that for me. So yeah, they turn around their sentences. Yeah, let me see if I can just find some other funny ones. They say like, hey, you got to be depan yumedi, which means you got to be there upon your meditation. So like when they're like people who are like, there's a lot of Rastafarians in the Caribbean. And the way that you would envision these people is they're the guys with the huge, like, you know, dreadlocks and the huge rosses that are like piled up on top of their head, and they put like this hat on it. and they kind of have like their own language. So like you greet them on the street and they're like, hey boy, Irie, and Irie means like good vibes, like yeah, I'm having good vibes. And they're always like, yeah boy, you got to be Depan Yumedi, you got to be Depan Yites, and that means like you got to be focused on your meditation, and you got to be on the right side, you got to be doing the right thing. Or they'll be like, like here in the United States, when someone is saying a phrase, it will be like, you know, like when I'm saying, and I'm trying to explain my point and I want you to like agree with me, I'm like, you know what I mean? And there they say, you understand what I'm saying now, right? And the Rastafarians, they don't say understand, they say overstand, because they're not under anybody. So they're like, boy, you overstand me, right? And so it's just like there's all sorts of like little quirky things like about their language that you pick up on. And the locals and the members actually love it when it's not very dignified to speak like it like all the time, because you want to separate yourself like as a representative of Jesus Christ, but at the same time you want to become kind of a part of who they are and what they're all about. And so I mean, using phrases like here and there can actually like open the door to be able to kind of just like get into their homes. And I'll just end on this one. This is actually a really funny story. I had a companion who went to the door, and this little kid comes out and he's like, hey, is your dad home? And the kid's like, huh? And he's like, is your dad home? And he's like, huh? And he didn't understand what he was saying, and so he's like, boy, your daddy to home? And the kid's like, oh yeah. And so he like runs inside and he comes back out and he's like, he's not here. And then he's like, okay, how about is your mom home? And he's like, huh? And so you ask again, like, your mommy to home? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, could you go get her for me? And they don't understand, could you go get her for me? So he's like, can you fetch she for me now? Which is like, can you go fetch her for me? And so it's like, it's really funny how sometimes they can't understand like what you're saying. And so there's this kind of this contrast where like you don't think you can understand them, but sometimes they can't even understand you. So it's just, yeah, it's a joy to be able to get to learn their language and how they talk.